How to use if statement in Python. Let's start. Python control structures allow you to alter the execution flow of a program. In this way, instead of sequentially executing each line of code, you can set conditions that determine which blocks of code should be executed and in what order. One of the most commonly used conditionals in Python is the if statement. With this control structure, a given condition can be evaluated and, depending on whether or not it is met, a specific block of code can be executed. For example, if we want to check whether a number is greater or less than 0, we can use an if in Python as follows. If this is true, the message number is greater than 0 is printed. If the condition is false, that is, if the number is less than or equal to 0, the code block is not executed. Use of the if statement. A very real example of the use of the if statement would be if we have two values a and b, which we want to divide. The most important thing to divide is to verify that b is different from 0, since the division by 0 is not defined. It is here where the if conditionals come in so that before making the division, it verifies the values so that everything is okay. In this case we can see how an if can be used in Python. With the not equal operator we check that the number b is different from 0, and if it is, the code is executed. This means that an if has two parts. 1. The condition that has to be met for the code block to be executed, in our case b not equal 0. 2. The block of code that will be executed if the above condition is met. It is very important to note that the if statement must be terminated by a colon, and the block of code to be executed must be indented. If you use a code editor, indentation will probably happen automatically when you press enter. This means that everything that follows the if and is indented will be part of the code block that will be executed if the condition is met. It also means, therefore, that any code that is executed outside the if will always be executed. Combine conditions. In Python it is also possible to combine several conditions in a single logical expression using the and or operators. For example, we can check if a number is positive and less than 100. As with the AND operator, we can use the OR operator to check if one of several conditions is true. For example, we can check if a number is negative or greater than 100. Remember that in Python you are not allowed to have an empty if block. If you need to leave a pending condition to implement later, you can use the pass statement to avoid syntax errors. Something that exists in Python, but is not recommended, is to put the whole block that goes inside the if on the same line, just after the colon. If the block of code contains one or at most two lines and is not very long, it can be useful to save some line of code. If your code block has more than one line, you can put them on the same line by separating them with semicolons. These are things that Python has for being a flexible language. We share it with you just to expand your knowledge and have more tools at your disposal. Use of else and elif. We may not only want to do something if a certain condition is met, but we may also want to do something else. This is where the else clause comes into play. The if part behaves in the same way we have already explained, with the difference that if that condition is not met, the code inside the else will be executed. So far we have seen how to execute a block of code if an instruction is fulfilled, or another if it is not fulfilled, but this is not enough. In many cases, we can have several different conditions and for each one we want a different code. This is where elifs, a contraction of else if, come in. These allow us to evaluate multiple conditions in the same structure. For example, we can say that if a is greater than 5 print is greater than 5, otherwise if a is less than 5 print is less than 5, and if neither of the above two conditions are met, print is equal to 5. This clause allows us to add multiple conditions in the same code block, that is, we can have as many elif blocks as necessary, and each of them will evaluate its condition in sequential order until it finds one that is true. If a condition is true, the associated code block will be executed and the if-elif-else structure will be exited. Finally, it is important to note that there can only be one if block and one else block within a conditional structure. If you come from other programming languages, you will know that the switch is an alternative form of elif, however in Python this clause does not exist. The ternary operator. This is a very powerful tool that many programming languages have. In Python, it is a conditional expression that allows you to define a variable in one line instead of 3 lines using an if and an else. The syntax is as follows: code if true, if, condition, else, code if not true. The ternary operator, as we can see, is a way of writing an if-else conditional structure on a single line. It has 3 parts: the condition that is evaluated, the code that is executed if the condition is true, and the code that is executed if the condition is false. In this way, we could make the following example code. This way of writing a conditional is very useful and saves a few lines of code and increases the speed at which we write.